Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to your Tuesday Live. I'm here with the incomparable Paul. If you are coming to us as an Inside Texas reader, thank you so much. Go to InsideTexas.com, get all that data, all the information, all the writing from Paul you need. If you're coming to us from the Twitter sphere, thank you so much for being here. If you were shopping in Academy Sports for fishing lures and bought a T-shirt and now you're a fan, we welcome you all. Please welcome. It's a big tent here at the University of Texas Fandom, and we're happy that you're here. Paul, I think it's important for the fine people that have joined us today to hear some of your thoughts on the SEC championship, and then we can move past it, because if you have written about at InsideTexas.com, more important things are on the horizon.
That's right. Hey, very briefly, you mentioned the purchasing of a T-shirt.
Yes.
And being, quote, a T-shirt fan.
Oh, well, yeah, it was a roundabout way of talking about it. Sure.
That's a criticism, or they think it's a criticism of the University of Texas, that we have a fan base beyond the actual graduates of the institution. I've always thought that was an amusing insult, that we're insulting you that lots of people like you and think you represent the state, even if you didn't go to the school. That's interesting.
Well, now that you brought it up, I do think that, if you've got an admissions rate around 63%, you may actually have all of your fans go to that school.
That's right.
It's mathematically possible that could be true.
It's true.
So, yes, we are here. I want to talk a little bit about this SEC game. I don't know how I have a suspicion, because you seem like a relatively cool and collected guy. I have, I've been in some pretty stressful situations. I used to volunteer as an EMT, dealt with stabbing, some people that have coded. Watching these games, I get way more anxious than I ever do in those situations. Are you an anxious watcher, or how do you watch the game?
I'm pretty calm, and I also take notes. So that helps to calm you. But I'll notice my writing degrades at certain key moments. Yeah.
Sure.
Or it trails off. Like, I can hear the drums approaching, and then it, like Lord of the Rings, it trails off. I'm pretty calm, but then I do have moments of, punctuated excitement, let's say.
Sure.
And then I also will do push-ups.
All right.
I do nervous push-ups. So in the first half of the Texas-Georgia game, I think I did 10, 15.
Okay. 10 sets or just reps?
Reps. And then in the second half,
great.
I did about 145, 150, I think.
All right.
That probably is a good indicator of what's going on in the game. More push-ups, the more Texas is in peril. So, yeah, that's it. It was an interesting game. Look, I mean, Texas absolutely dominated the first half statistically. I think the refs probably put their finger on the scale a little bit.
Sure.
Whether they got excited or they, I mean, look, what was funny is I watched SMU, the other Texas upstart, go play the ACC title game, basically for a Clemson home game. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, right?
Yeah.
And Clemson was assessed 0 penalties in that game.
How is that possible?
First time since 1956 at Clemson. So you almost wonder if the refs of the conference have this feeling of like, one, we got to keep this game competitive, but two, like, we're here to defend the old guard from these upstarts. But yeah, I mean, I just thought there were some nonsense calls that kept the game close, and then there were some deserved calls that also kept the game close. And then Texas didn't execute in the red zone. 6-3 at halftime. You have a 254 to 54 yardage advantage. I mean, it should have been 21-0, right?
Yeah.
17-3, something like that. It just didn't happen. And you knew, as always happens in games like this, when the teams are somewhat evenly matched, but one team gets off and just kicks the other team's ass, but it doesn't show on the scoreboard.
Yeah.
The second half, you're in for some trouble, right?
Yeah. And I'm wondering,
I had this feeling of dread of like, we really needed to be up 16-3 at half. And
we felt that was what was talked about all week, is just making sure that the script was executed and capitalized on.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, do you feel that this is a trend now, especially coming out of that A&M game where we just really struggled to put it in the end zone, or are these just flukes? How would you categorize that?
I mean, so I think it was discrete differences.
Sure.
Against A&M, frankly, Ewers had 2 really bad turnovers that
Right.
we would have scored touchdowns.
It's a fair point. Sure.
You play A&M 100 times, I think you win that game. We win that game 31-3 more often than not.
Right.
We got dominated on the line of scrimmage again. Yeah. And I don't know why Georgia is excited by the color orange and the cool logo, sure. But when they see Texas across the field, they get fired up and they play hard. And I mean, these guys have played 52 quarters of football this year, Georgia. And I think they've played 10 good quarters. And I think 6 of them are against us.
I was going to say about 50%, but yeah, that's about right.
Yeah. So look, if that holds in the playoffs, they're typical, like, yeah, we kind of just show up and maybe we'll win, maybe we won't. If that holds in the playoffs, they're going to be an early exit, especially without Carson Beck. If they elevate their play, and especially on defense, where they have some monsters, they're going to be a hard out, even if they can't score points. I mean, they can legitimately hold everyone they play to 10, 13, 17 points, and then it's going to be a grind. But I just think they're such an odd football team psychologically, but they get up for Texas. There's no question about that.
It's crazy to me that with Sark's offense, we're now in a position where we kind of feel like we just got to get to 20.
Yeah.
If we can get to 20, this defense will keep us in it. It's an odd feeling for me to think about a Sark offense and know that, man, if we could just get to that small threshold, we might be able to pull this thing out.
Do you know who Brian Billick is?
Yeah.
So Billick, if you guys will recall, was the high-flying star OC of the Minnesota Vikings when they had Randy Moss, Chris Carter. I mean, it was just disgusting. And they averaged, 35 points a game, and they were the wonderkin offense of the NFL, rolling up and down the field. And then he becomes the head coach of the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah.
So Billick realized very quickly, this isn't the same team. Yeah. And we're going to win games 16-10 because Ray Lewis returns a fumble 61 yards. And my job of my offense is to hand the ball to Jamal Lewis and not lose the game. And I'm sure that was tough for him psychologically. The cool thing about Sark is he's a real football coach. He does not view football as a vehicle solely for his offensive genius. He coaches a complete game. And I really do think Sark would rather win a game 31-10 than 49-28. Sure. I think he values both sides of the ball. I think he values game control, the sort of advanced statistic people talk about, the idea of that whatever the score is, who's in charge of the game as it's being played. That said, we're not always in charge of the game because the offense is not playing as well as it could be. And there's sort of myriad reasons for it. I mean, Trey Wisner is a really game player. He's as tough as nails. I love the guy as a maximizer. He's not an elite running back, right? No. Isaiah Bond has not been himself for multiple games. The offensive line has been a little up and down. Our protections have been a little up and down. And then, frankly, Quinn Ewers is a guy who we pointed out in Inside Texas. Ian and I did a whole deep dive. There's first quarter Ewers, second quarter Ewers, third quarter Ewers, and fourth quarter Ewers. And he's off the screen. So you've got to manage all that. And it's a tough thing. So Sark's trying to do his best. But as fallible as we are, as many faults as we have, every other team in the playoff has this as many or more. So that's the wonderful thing about the playoff is it's a new season, and we can go win this thing just as much as anybody else.
Well, in regards to that, I want to go to our friend Burt Reynolds Jr., who I've given some grief to in the comments section, but really great question. So Burt Reynolds Jr. here asks, Paul, can we talk about how Sark can change up the run schemes against Georgia or teams with similarly skilled front seven? Does it need to be changed, or does it just need to be executed?
It needs to be executed. And within the question is an assumption. Who is a similarly skilled front seven?
That is the question.
So again, I hate to abuse my styles make fights concept, but I knew when we played A&M's front, we were not in any trouble because they're big physical guys, but they're not super quick. They're not sudden guys. They're power guys. Power guys don't give us a lot of trouble in terms of pass rush. Georgia gives us trouble because they have a bunch of freaking greyhounds running around. Like, I mean, we tried to run laterally, and their linebackers are as fast as our running backs.
Yes.
And that's not common. So
no.
When you say similarly skilled front seven, there isn't one. And you might say, well, then why is Georgia statistically? I don't know. They don't play hard against anyone else but us.
They are an anomaly. It's phenomenal to me. When I was looking at the statistics, they were not that different against UMass as they were anybody else. I will say this, with the exception of Texas, go look at their statistics if you're curious about this. They are very, very consistent until they play Texas, and it is a different ball game with them. Yeah. I don't know whether that's personnel matchups, whether that cabal of defensive coaches just really start licking their lips and go after it, but they play a different game against Texas, and there's no denying it.
Well, and it's also just matchups, as you said. So
sure.
In the 80s, sort of a golden age of boxing at the lightweight and middleweight, and you had Sugar Ray Leonard, Tommy Hearns, Marvin Hagler, Roberto Duran. And even right beneath that group is another group of amazing boxers. And any other time you would have known their names, like Wilfredo Benitez. But the top was so good, you don't even know who those guys are. Here's the thing. Roberto Duran is a great fighter, and he could beat Sugar Ray Leonard 40% of the time, right? Out of just toughness and grit. He can never beat Tommy Hearns, ever. If he just walks straight down the pipe trying to be tough guy, Tommy Hearns is going to knock you out every time. But Sugar Ray Leonard can beat Tommy Hearns. So it's styles make fights. And people struggle with that in football because often there is the one dominant team that it doesn't matter what the styles are. I mean, 2019 LSU, it doesn't matter. They're just going to score on you. 2005 Texas, it just doesn't matter. Vince Young is going to be Vince Young. Right. And a bunch of other good players around them on defense and offense. So 2004 USC, when they got cooking at the end of that season and they humiliated OU in their bowl, that team does not exist in this tournament. I mean, Oregon's the top seed. They are very fallible. I watched them give up over 500 yards, 292 yards rushing to Penn State. And Penn State rolled up and down the field all game against those guys. Everyone's got warts in this field. Texas has a good draw. Beat Clemson. Go take care of Arizona State. And I think we'll be shocked at where we are. And I think we're going to be shocked at who's bracketed around us because a bunch of teams that we expect to be there will not be there.
We will get into that bracket, and you've got some great questions coming into the chat here, but I want to hear really quickly from one of our sponsors. Hi, I want to tell you about Laura Baker. If you're looking for a new home in the 512, or even at this point, let's face it, 737 area code, there's only one number to call. That's Laura Baker at 512-784-0505. As a member of the elite Andy Allen team with Keller Williams, Laura has helped Longhorns find the home of their dreams in Central Texas. Just ask our resident sex symbol, Ian Boyd, who moved all the way from Michigan to Texas with Laura's help. Laura can help you find what you're looking for in the 512, the 737, or even parts of the 254 and the 210. Just, give her a call at 512-784-0505. Her email is in the description as well as the rest of her contact details. She's a friend. Give her a call. Paul, we've got some personnel questions, but I want to start with our patron saint. We're going to go over here to Brett Nelson. And this is some heavy duty forecasting because we're looking into next season. But just out of curiosity here, Brett is asking, do you see Sark running Arch a lot next year? And I think a lot is probably what you're going to focus on if I know you, Paul. But I think he's going to run some, but what do you think a lot means?
LC, you're a skilled thespian. Was that a correct reading of the page?
Sorry, forgive me. Paul, you see Sark running a lot next year?
Paul, see him running that Arch Manning?
Paul.
Or you think Arch Manning's going to play for Auburn? Paul, thinks that Sark will run Arch some next year, but that will not be predominantly what we do with Arch. We're going to be developing Arch, the NFL drop back passer. But yeah, Arch is going to take off and run whether Sark likes it or not, because Arch is a competitive dude and he kind of likes the physical aspects of football and he likes trucking people. So yeah, he's going to run some. It's not going to be a dual threat. Arch runs for 800 yards or anything like that, but we're going to run him in the red zone. When it's 3rd and 2, no one's open, Arch is going to take off and get 6. And he's going to be a really interesting weapon that Sark has not had at quarterback in quite a while.
Another personnel question we have here is to do with the line. So if John A is asking, if Banks is healthy, how realistic would it be to move Gooseby to right tackle to replace Big Cam? And he's referring to save some on the penalties, right? So Cam much maligned in terms of the penalties this year. What are your thoughts on that, Paul?
No. So if Gooseby could have beaten him out, he would have beaten him out.
He'd be there.
Yeah, he'd be there. Also, some guys are directionally oriented at tackle. So you would think that your left tackle could play right tackle. No, it's a different drop step. It's a different, and some guys are left-footed or right-footed, depending on how they've gotten used to playing tackle. Now, eventually, over time, they can play both. Usually NFL guys can do that. But a lot of college guys, especially a young guy like Gooseby, he may not be able to play right tackle. He may not have the footwork down because it's all opposite.
Yeah.
Go out and throw a football with your left hand. And it's not quite that dramatic, but it feels that way. If you've played on the offensive line, guard, interchangeable. It's no different. It's literally no different. Center, you're always the center. But the tackle positions feel different, and it's different drop steps, and it's aligning and coordinating your body differently. So some left tackles can't play right and some right tackles can't play left. But yeah, I mean, the bottom line is if Gooseby was a better option than Cam Williams, he'd be out there. Also, if you watch Gooseby a little critically against Georgia, he struggled run blocking against those guys because he's a little younger and he needs some time in the weight room.
I think the underlying premise there of that question too is Sark playing favorites? And that's just not the case. If you are on the field, it's because Sark believes you're going to give him the best chance to win the game. That's why Arch hasn't played over Quinn up to this point. If he legitimately thought Arch was going to give him the victory, Arch would be in the game. But I don't see him doing that because he's just not there yet. We've got a question here. Oh, go ahead, Paul, please.
I was just going to say to that point, Trey Wisner's our starting running back.
It's a fair point. Yeah, absolutely.
14 coming into the season.
Yeah.
Jaden Blue was considered co-equal to Baxter.
Yeah.
Jaden Blue is very clearly our second team running back right now.
Right.
And he's not even getting a lot of reps. So your time and your performance reveals where the coaches will put you. Now on that point, we'll probably talk about this again next week, but we got to make some decisions about Isaiah Bond.
Yeah.
So whether it's his head or whether it's the injury or a combination thereof, we got to get better reps out of that third receiver spot. And kind of curious, do we do that with Wingo or Bolden or some combo of both? Because Golden and DeAndre Moore came to play against Georgia.
Yeah, and they're when you talk about Wingo and Bolden they're certainly making the case. So I think it's a very fair assessment. Burt Reynolds Jr. has another question that I really want to let's go in here. He heard another analyst, there are no other analysts, say that SEC focuses on tackles when calling holding. So the reason Cam has more holds is that Quinn tends to roll to the right. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Quinn does escape one direction. Almost all quarterbacks have a preferred direction of escape. Sam Ehlinger had a very predictable avenue of egress when he felt pressure in the pocket.
Yeah.
Little more effective scrambler and more powerful guy than Quinn in the pocket, obviously. But yeah, I think there's something to that. Also, outside zone, we get called for a lot of holding on that. You'll notice the inside receiver on outside zone, especially when we run our bunch formations, they get a lot of the holding calls because they have to effectively reach and you've got to maintain contact for a few seconds as the timing of the play syncs up. If you watch the NFL, no one runs outside zone better than the Shanahan clan. And you know what? They get holding calls all the time, especially with Trent Williams out for the 49ers. Yeah. I swear to God, every fourth play for the 49ers is a holding call. So that's just part and parcel of that system and that offense. But what you want is the upside of that play, where when you block it right, it goes for 55, and we haven't had that upside.
Let's transition over to the playoffs. This is it. I was just talking to
Playoffs.
We're talking
Playoffs.
Playoffs.
I'm just trying to win a game.
This is a classic. That is such a good bit in terms of aging yourself.
Yes.
You're really letting people know exactly what era you're coming from.
When you're slightly younger, you do the Allen Iverson version of that. You just substitute it in practice.
It's just practice. Absolutely.
Talking about practice, not a game.
If you think about where we were last year, football season was over. You'd have your SEC championship. Then you would have, maybe you're doing a Jan 1 bowl. Maybe you're one of the 4 teams in the playoff. But for most of football was over. You would have kids maybe sitting out because they wanted to prep for the NFL draft. Maybe they were transferring. Maybe they were obviously more unhealthy. Whatever the case may be, we had less football. And now we have meaningful football in 11 days. And for me, I think that's fantastic. And I am really excited about this, just knowing that on December 21st, I can sit down all day long and watch football that actually has some significance. But let's get into this. Let's get into this bracket and look at this a little bit, because I want to thank our Canadian friends up at Sportsnet for creating such a nice graphic. but here we are. I want to get your thoughts on this, Paul, because you wrote a really good article at InsideTexas.com about why this is important and how we can progress through this. And I would just love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, look. We have got to change and reorient our thinking as college football fans. And I can write about it a year ago, like, hey, the playoff is going to change completely. The expanded playoff is going to change completely how we think about the season. It's all going to be prologue to the playoff, which is the real season, right?
Right.
If this was still the 4-team playoff format, by the way, we'd be looking at our bowl.
Yeah.
We'd be sitting on the sideline. Right now, we're one of the favored teams to win the whole thing. I know Texas fans, that's hard for you to believe coming off a loss, but that is the truth. And we got a great poll. We got a great seeding. Also, there's the theory of something and then the reality of it. So there's the theory of the 12-team playoff and the buys for the conference champions, and everyone nods and goes, that makes sense, a buy for the conference champion. And then you actually seed it and you look at who's getting buys and you go, this doesn't this is stupid. Why do Arizona State and Boise have buys? So that needs to be obviously looked at again. But I think you'll see something similarly with the playoffs, that people realize around December 20th, December 21st, like, oh, the actual season just started.
Yeah.
Like the season that endures, which is, did you win the national title or not? That's what's about to get decided. So I love that we beat OU. I love that we beat A&M. I love that we played for the SEC title. That was all just prologue. That was a warm-up. And here's the season. It's staring right in front of you. So I think the most interesting thing is to look at the very top of that bracket where Texas is. Ultimately, the semifinal showdown that we think, if things go chalk, is Oregon, Texas.
Yeah.
I don't know if that will happen. Oregon has a couple of good teams that could give them problems.
Yeah.
Whoever emerges from there, we've got to take care of business against Clemson. I think there's 7 teams that can win it realistically. And then I think there's 5 teams that if they won it, it would be the greatest underdog tale in college football history.
Yeah, I mean, and you're starting with that Friday night game. You know, that little bus trip that Indiana is taking over to South Bend to really kind of establish themselves. And look, Cignetti has been a great story for college football. It is a great. And when you talk about an underdog, becoming a potential championship, you know, he's coming from JMU. He brings over 7 players, I think, to Indiana, completely turns that thing around in a 180. And now he's got a shot at a national championship. So yeah, there are some great stories in there, but there's also some stories that really kind of befundle people. And the seeding is certainly one of them. And I'm a firm believer that that's going to change. I think that's one of the glaring things that is going to be different next year. But the thing that I really appreciate about this, and it's the thing that probably frustrates people the most, is that college football is still an opinion-driven sport.
Yeah.
We don't have the NFL, the NHL, the NBA where it is empirical. You are in, you are out. We still have opinion-driven sport. And I love that because, one, it gives us the opportunity to do this, and it keeps the conversation about the game going. And I just love that aspect about everything. And then you can have those conversations about an Alabama, which I would love to talk about because that is the hot button topic. To me, this is dead simple, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Honestly, if you go 10,000 feet macro perspective, if you're the 12th team trying to get into the playoff, I just don't really want to hear like your case from either direction, like any of them, because you're the most marginal team in the field. SMU loses a head-to-head to Clemson and is seated above them. Immediately, we have an immediate data point. SMU gets a seed higher. And, I think they're going to go up to Penn State. I think it's going to be December 21st up in rural northeastern Pennsylvania.
Right.
And I think it's going to be an interesting shock to I think they're show ponies, not snow ponies.
Well, look, exactly. There's going to be a climate difference.
That's going to be very interesting. And then I just think ultimately, I think that you do have to look at schedule, but Alabama defeated their own case. I mean, just the OU game, man. Vanderbilt. So here's the thing. Vanderbilt, I understand why they're dangerous. You break them down and you're like, okay, if you let them play their style, you've got Diego Pavia, you've got, a really good defensive minded coach who can make key plays at key critical moments. Yeah. If you get lulled into their style, they're very dangerous. But Oklahoma, man, on the road getting skunked. I understand the OU defense is still very viable. I don't understand how you let Jackson Arnold run you into the ground. And their offense just got destroyed. So Alabama doesn't have a great argument. Frankly, I don't think SMU has a very good argument. The teams that I actually feel for are kind of the South Carolinas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who they go play Clemson head-to-head, win. They beat the ACC champion in a close game, but on Clemson's turf. And then South Carolina just played a really tough schedule all around. And they're very competitive in their losses. You could argue that the refs effectively gave the LSU game to LSU in Baton Rouge. And at the end of the season, had South Carolina played SMU's schedule, I think there's a fat part of the bell curve where they're 12-1. And not only in the playoff, they're like the 2 seed, LC. Yeah. Instead, in our current format, they're on the outside looking in. They're not even in the discussion for the playoff because people are like, well, Ole Miss beat you head to head. That's the other thing is the transitive property grows weaker and weaker as the year progresses.
Yep.
Because everyone's putting losses on everyone.
Well, and that's the point, right, that you're bringing up is when people talk about strength of schedule, at least the folks that I have heard of the last few weeks, and these are smart people, they're using very selective reasoning. And they're saying my strength of schedule are the teams that I beat. Well, who did you lose to?
Yeah.
You lost to some really weak teams.
Well, they also top 25.
Right.
How arbitrary is top 25? What's the inherent meaning of top 25? Texas played no top 25 teams. Yeah, but Texas played like 7 top 40 teams. So
yeah,
is that a little bit of rhetorical sophistry there? I mean, do we think that the number 24 team in the AP poll is manifestly superior than number 27?
Right.
Probably not. Yep. In fact, I know there's some teams not in the top 25 of the AP poll that are better football teams than number 18. So, sure. There's a lot of ways that people do this. Ultimately, we got to get more sophisticated and we've got to go to the college basketball model where they look at tranches. Like, here's your top 20, your top 20 opponents. Here's your top 50 opponents. Here's your top 100. The problem is that you have a more robust data set for basketball because you play 30, 35 regular season games.
Right.
You're only playing 12 in college football. So ultimately, that kind of is what makes this sport fun, that you're having these big debates about number 12 at-large seed. But ultimately, if you're arguing about number 12, there's stuff you could have done in your season that you could have made it not an argument. And, so go do that. before you compile all your rhetorical evidence for why you should be in the playoff.
One of the things that I know, just in terms of when you talk about empirical data, you're talking about numbers and how important numbers are. And when you're making a big decision like buying a house, I know that you know someone that knows numbers really well. And I'd like you to tell the people about our friend Gabe.
Yeah, in the mortgage business, the brackets have already been set. The tournament has already been played. Gabe Winslow, resounding champion. Not only the state of Texas, but in the other states in which he's licensed. So if you're outside of the great state of Texas, as LC and I are, you could still call this guy. You can reach him at 832-557-1095. Why would you want to make this call? Because this man is overqualified. He's got a law degree, former National Merit Scholar. He's been in the business for over 20 years. He's also owned a title company. He understands every aspect of this. He's also an independent mortgage broker. What does that mean? He doesn't get one bid from Chase or Wells Fargo. It means he goes out and independently bids your deal to 60 different mortgage lenders. And then he picks the best one that suits and fits your best interest. So Gabe is a guy who's going to be on your side. He's a guy who will pick up the phone at midnight if you're having issues right before closing. And there's always issues right before closing. So give him a call, 832-557-1095.
I love that you've committed Gabe to these late night calls. It's written in stone. Gabe is going to be answering your phone personally on every one of those calls that happens midnight before you're closing. There is a question here, and I want to thank again once our friend Burt Reynolds Jr., who's absolutely just bringing the heat today. Thank you for that, Burt. His question, and this is a super chat, is, and this is, I'm curious about this as well. Which, quote, unlikely would you most like to see win, Paul?
Oh, like fun?
Yeah. Like what do you, like fun?
I was thinking to play Texas, and I was like, not Clemson, actually.
Right.
Indiana.
Sure.
If Indiana beats Notre Dame in South Bend and then beats Georgia. Oh my God. Like, and then actually the other side of the bracket opens up, right? They're probably facing Penn State. If Penn State pulls a James Franklin against Boise, that would be incredible.
Right.
Could you imagine an Indiana-Boise State semifinal and it's Texas-Oregon on the other side? Yeah, I mean, Indiana's the most fun. Also, Curt Cignetti walks that fine line between I love this arrogant SOB and I despise this arrogant SOB. Yeah. If he was at any other school, if he was at a name school,
oh yeah,
you would despise this guy. But if he's 100%. In Indiana, so it's fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, Indiana is the most fun. I mean, I think. What do you think, LC? Who's yours?
Well, I mean, to me, I think the number one indisputable choice there is Indiana. I do love me some Scatterbo. Like just
Arizona
watching
State,
that ball of
choice.
knives run. Obviously, that would portend horrible things for Texas. But since we're playing this hypothetical here, there's something really fun about that team, that organization, that young coaching staff that came in and really turned that program around. To me, that is a testament to how this can be done. Look, you can turn a program around if you have the right personnel, the right attitude, and the willingness to do the work. So that aspect of it, I think, is really fun. But yes, I mean, irrefutably, the answer is Indiana.
Yeah, Arizona State's so fun. And I love Scatterbo. I mean, he and Ashton Genty are trying to bring back running backs as a valuable commodity and not just a tool to move your offense, right? That's interchangeable. Cam Scatterbo is just awesome. So a lot of people may not know this, but their number one wide receiver, Jordan Tyson, is out for the season, and he was their passing game. So Scatterbo is now their number one receiver, not just their number one leading rusher. So, I mean, they've got a lot invested in that guy, and we'll cross that bridge once we take care of Clemson, we hope. But that's going to be a fun matchup, but it's obviously a matchup that's not great for the old Sun Devils. So we'll see.
Scott in Texas has a question. And again, we've got this bracket up because it is the topic du jour, certainly. But Paul, why should any team deserve a bye at this stage? Reward for their season results? Is it better for all to start and compete at the same level throughout? And if I may just jump in here, real Scott, I do think that we have got to figure out a way to do this where we're still honoring the regular season and the league championship. And I think that's why you have those buys.
Yeah. So the answer is yes. They are trying to honor regular season results. Specifically, they don't want to degrade the conference championship games. And you saw that with the committee giving Texas and Penn State plum seeding and effectively punishing Notre Dame for not playing a conference title game, right? So they rewarded the two losers of two conference title games. Now, if you're going to losing in overtime is kind of the way you want to do it, I guess, just from an appearances standpoint. It didn't feel great. Penn State also very competitive. If you guys didn't see that game, very competitive with Oregon for about 3.5 quarters. So that's the answer. They don't want to degrade those, and that's for giving the regular season some power and merit, but also those conference title games make a lot of money, and they don't want
100%.
to. They don't want to hollow out the meaning of it. Also, there's 12 in the field, so how do you have everyone play in the first round?
Right. So a couple of hypotheticals for you here, Paul. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on this. If Texas doesn't take Georgia to overtime, are they the 5 seed?
Yeah,
Okay.
if we lose by a field goal or whatever at the end. Now, if we had lost again the way we lost in Austin, I think we're the 7.
Yeah.
I think we're opening up hosting the Indiana Hoosiers. And smoke them if you got them. SIGs is coming down.
That's what. So one of the storylines that everybody is loving to hit on here is the Klubnik versus Ewers rematch. I'm just curious, and again, I did not watch a lot of this. This is I don't have. I'll just admit to everybody right now, as I said before, I've done some things in my life. I've got a real stomach for a lot of stuff. Recruiting is too intense for me. I just can't handle it. So I have not.
Wow,
it's so much. But I did not watch Klubnik play a lot in high school, and this seems to be the conversation of the times is this Klubnik versus Ewers rematch. And I'm just curious if you think there's anything there.
I mean, it's an interesting story. Two state of Texas boys, both journeyed out of state initially.
Yeah.
One stuck with Clemson, one came back. Both guys who have been heralded, both guys who have been thrown on the trash heap and kicked by their own fan base. Both guys who've had some highs and lows and can experience both in the same game. So I think that's an interesting angle. I mean, the whole idea of like, well, this is a revenge game and all that. I mean, dude, they're just the two leaders of their two teams, and whichever one plays better is going to give their team a better chance to win. I will say that Klubnik shoulders a bigger burden of the offense for Clemson, and that Clemson offense has not been great the last 4 or 5 games. Phil Maffa, their very good running back, he's been a little banged up. And their running game has not been effective. So they've been running Cade Klubnik a lot more. And then he's been throwing it his typical 35 to 40 times too. So a lot of the burden of the game is put on Klubnik in this. Be very interesting to see how he holds up against a Texas defense that, he played Georgia in the opener. And we saw Georgia, at least in the second half. They've also seen South Carolina, comparable front to Texas. Neither of those teams have a secondary as good as Texas. And they scored 3 against Georgia and 14 against South Carolina. So in Austin, I'm expecting, for those of you in Austin, in Texas, or who are coming in for the game, I expect a crazy, raucous home field advantage. And we'll see how Klubnik does over 4 quarters. I think it's going to be a tough road to hoe for that guy.
Well, but it is the low hanging fruit of sports narratives, a player versus a player. They do this, and about the only sport that this is really applicable is basketball. They do this in the NHL playoffs all the time. The 2 goaltenders against each other, 2 pitchers against each other. And, it's just not the way it works. Klubnik is going to play our defense. Ewers is going to play their defense. It's not a 1v1, but
yeah, I mean, if Ewers was playing our defense, I'd be concerned.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah,
I'm concerned anyway. I mean, Clemson's not a pushover, but
no.
Of the 5 unlikelies, Clemson, SMU, Indiana, Arizona State, Boise State, I think Clemson of those 5 is the most threatening to us.
Yeah,
but they're also in the unlikely category for a reason. The difference between Clemson and like Tennessee is better across the board, I think. And they've got some upside that if they play really well, Tennessee can beat any team in the playoff.
Yeah.
I'm not sure you can say the same thing about Arizona State. I think Arizona State can bring their A game, and I think we can still beat them.
There's several of you in here from obviously different fan bases. And if you're hate watching us, thank you so much. We really do appreciate you being here. It is fun to have different points of view on here. And, I'm going to agree with our friend here, Primetime Dog, that's, Tennessee versus OSU. I don't believe that it's the top game, but it is certainly one of the games I'm most excited about. I think the top game here is that's fair. I think in terms of matchups, the top game is Ohio State, Tennessee, but
who's going to be the most watched?
That's the thing is it's going to be that Friday night game. I think Friday night game.
Clemson will get huge viewership.
Yep.
And I think Ohio State, Tennessee is going to get huge viewership. Indiana, Notre Dame, if it's competitive early, especially, or Indiana gets out to a lead, I think you'll get a lot of like, hey, go turn on, like texts that are going back and forth to friend groups. Go turn on this game.
Yeah. Well, it's also that Friday night slot. They're not competing against the NFL. That is it. That is the game. So in terms of numbers, I could definitely see that Notre Dame, Indiana having the viewership pretty high. I agree with you, though. I don't think it's going to be the highest, but I definitely think it's going to be up there for sure.
Yeah, I'm gonna research this, but the last I looked, so first of all, if you look at the top 50 most watched games this season, the SEC is disproportionately represented, let's say. Texas, I think, might be the most watched team or the second most watched team. So everything the SEC was dreaming about, adding Texas and OU, Texas, the school, and Texas, the state of, was the great prize of college football.
Right.
And the SEC secured it because no matter what criticisms or you want to be derogatory to the Aggies, they're the clear number 2 in the state of Texas in terms of driving viewership. So I always laugh when people who are like doing national podcasts are like, well, SMU captures that DFW market. And it's like, no.
Well,
Texas, Texas A&M, and number 3, by the way, is OU in DFW. So,
100%. Yeah, unless you're in a recent model Land Rover, you're probably watching OU in that game.
If you are rocking a Land Rover, there are chances that you have the SMU game up. It's possible.
It's a very, very fair chance. I want to thank everybody for being here today. This was great. This is a fun opportunity for me filling in for Connor while he's on his swingers cruise. I don't know if I should say that or not. Maybe I probably shouldn't. It's probably not a swingers cruise, but he's on a cruise.
He didn't say it wasn't a swingers cruise.
That's a fair point. That's a very fair point. I should have. Yeah. I mean, we can just go ahead and make that assumption, I think.
Hey, have you heard about these themed cruises of like narrow interest theme cruises of like, there might be like financial cruises, go with the editors of whatever, Smart Money Magazine.
Really?
But there's also interest cruises like New Kids on the Block.
Oh, sure. No, I've heard that.
And it's just a bunch of women in their 40s and early 50s going and reliving their childhood. And apparently the New Kids on the Block and NSYNC guys slay during these cruises. So
there's and I'm sure you guys will correct me in the comments in the chat, but if I recall, there was a Brandon Saunderson cruise, which is, I don't know, I've never read his stuff, but he is a massive fantasy writer.
Oh, okay.
And look, I'm going to paint with a broad brush here, y'all. So just buckle up. I imagine that the amount of sunscreen needed for that particular cruise was just, it's going to border on Diddy's baby oil order. There's just going to be so much sunscreen that is needed for those melanin deprived folks that it had to been phenomenal.
Going out on the swim deck of that cruise would be jarring, just to look at the various forms of life that are occupying the lounge chairs. Would be quite a difference to like a spring break cruise out of Galveston, right? It's going to be a bunch of sorority girls going to Jamaica. Doing a science fiction or fantasy cruise would be something. That would be something to see.
Yeah. For those of you playing at home, thinking that I wouldn't take this off the rails, we made it almost 44 minutes before it got absolutely buck wild. So thank you.
Our Jacob Woodyard says Brandon Sanderson ruined his favorite series. What was that?
Well, I think what happened, he's probably talking about Wheel of Time there.
He finished it.
He did, yes. He finished. I'm just assuming that that's what he's talking about.
Yeah, some authors are able to write in the style of the genre. So, of course, a great Texan, Robert E. Howard. Not many people know this, surprisingly, but Robert E. Howard, the author and creator of Conan the Barbarian, is from Cross Plains, Texas. And he tragically committed suicide at a young age. But then a bunch of people rediscovered Conan, loved the guy, loved the writing, and then people wrote in his style, like his successors. And they did a good job with it. They kept true to it. But my understanding is that sometimes when these series, I haven't read all of Wheel of Time. My understanding is that sometimes people like to put their own English on it instead of being faithful to the original. Yeah. And that doesn't go well.
I think it's really hard not to be honest with you. Like it at some point, we all styles make fights, Paul. We all have our own aesthetic to these things. So it's hard not to.
Some people, even who created the original thing, revisit the original thing, like George Lucas, and destroy all of the source material just because they're bored.
It's true. It's true. I mean, we have a long
midichlorians, LC.
Yeah, it happens all the time. It happens all the time. Well, thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. For those, again, that just bought a t-shirt, for those that are hate watching, for those that are subscribers at InsideTexas.com, thank you so much. If you're not a subscriber, please join us. There's some really great stuff going on. If you go into the show notes underneath, you will see a link to our transfer portal page. And that is where all of our recruiting guys are following that stuff very, very closely. It is an ever moving target, and there's a lot going on. So on behalf of Paul and myself, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. And we will see you later this week. You guys take care. Bye-bye.